Hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be painting hydrangea flowers in a really loose watercolour style. So I'm going to be showing you my trick for getting all of the little flower petals in place and then building that out into a big hydrangea. It's so much easier than it looks, so I can't wait to get started. Alright then guys, let's get painting. So, quick run through of supplies as always. So I have my palette here with my Winsor & Newton professional paints. I am using Legion Stonehenge Aqua Coldpress paper. So this is 100% cotton, 9 by 12 inches in a block, so it means the sides are glued in place. And then I have Princeton Aqua Elite size 6 round brush with a little pointy tip, my 2 cups of water and my paper towel as usual. So, hydrangeas are such an interesting flower to paint because they look so complex and so busy when you're looking at them, but actually they're just the same motif repeated. So what we're going to do is look at how to paint a small little leaflet, and then we're going to multiply that out. So I'm going to be using a mixture of some Prussian Blue and some Cobalt Blue just to vary up the colour tone with the blues. So I'm going to be drawing straight from the palette in places, creating a mixture as well in these big wells. If you don't have those colours, then any kind of blue combinations that you can get are just really good to create lots of difference. So on our paper you can choose any spot, but I recommend in the middle of where you want the round flower head to be. What we're going to do is paint our first leaflet, petal, mini petal. I don't know if they're petals or bracts, but our first little group of 4. So essentially hydrangeas are made up of 4 little petals in a 4 shape like that. So we're just going to paint that. Keep it nice and loose. Make sure you've got some white space in between your 4 and a little white space in the middle. And then we're going to do something with our colour to change that. So it could be we get some water to wash it off, and then we have a lighter one next to it. So we're going to paint 4 more and just let it touch in places. Then we could maybe go to the cobalt and do the same thing. Another 4 there. I'm choosing to paint hydrangeas in blue because that's my favourite colour type for them, but you can also do the ones in pink or the kind of pale green if you prefer. I'm using just some Prussian Blue here. You see that they're very loose. I'm just dragging my brush back and forth with a little wiggle, and I'm not overthinking it. I'm trying not to get the colours too similar when they're next to each other. So we're just going to paint them out, just in a bit of a little set there, connecting everything together. And you can see they're really rough, they're really not perfect. And then when we've got a little group like that, what we're going to do is use our brush. You can use a separate brush for this. In fact, I might do that. I'm going to use this size 2 brush. And then we're going to get some neat Prussian Blue on here. So you want this to be your darkest blue. Just a little bit of water. And then what we're going to do is tap it in a little circle around the inside of our set of 4. And let it bleed out a little bit. Now where it's drier it won't bleed as much, and then where it's not as dry it's definitely going to bleed a little bit more. You can also add a bit more water to your mixture if you want it to bleed further. And what this does is it creates the centre by almost creating a shadow in the centre of your little group of 4. So if you have, this is cotton paper, which means it stays wet for quite a long time, but if you have cheaper paper and you're kind of struggling with this, you can always paint a leaflet, then do the centre. But I can do a few and then carry on. So we're essentially going to repeat that lots of times to make the hydrangea. I'm changing up the value here and doing a lot of really light ones. Also, if you get into a space where you can't get 4 petals, you can always just use 3 or 2, and we'll almost imagine that the other petal is hidden underneath. So we're aiming here for a rough kind of bowl shape. ball. I suppose balls are round as well, but that's not what I was going for. So we'll just keep painting our little leaflets where we can. You can also overlap them a little if they've dried. I think that looks quite nice because watercolour is quite translucent. Make sure if you've got a load of light ones, then we put a darker one in. And vice versa. If you've got a load of dark and mid-tones, then make sure to use a really light tone. Just keep that contrast going. You see I'm going relatively quickly with these. I mean, firstly, obviously for the wet on wet effect, but also just because the idea is to keep these really rough and loose and just be filling the paper up with them. You know, we're not choosing a perfect composition here. We're not kind of doing anything too deliberate. It's very much a loose style. We'll just paint our little sets in, and then when you've done a few, we can come back to our deep Prussian blue mixture and just start putting some centers in there and letting them bleed out. You can see in some it will travel quite a long way if they're still very wet, and then in others it won't do so much. But that's okay. If it goes too far and you don't like it, you can always pick it up with a piece of kitchen roll or a dry brush. I quite like it when it bleeds out quite dark. You can also see where the effect of the contrast is. You know, this is why you need some really light values, because we're going to put the center detail in and it's going to bleed out. So you really want to have that contrast of the lighter petals and then the darker centers. So I'm now thinking about the shape of it and how I can get it into a circle, which bits look a bit unbalanced, and just filling those gaps. If we've got too much water, you can always dry that off on your brush. I love these sorts of paintings because they're almost meditative. You know, you're painting the same thing over and over again. You don't really have to think that hard about it. And then when we get to the edges, what you can do is some little pairs to just almost tuck anything in those gaps, or even a couple of single ones, just to fill a few gaps there. If you've got any gaps in the middle, you can also fill that with a single one. There's one there as well. You'll see this is absolutely not meant to be perfect. It is simply a nice loose style. We'll add a couple more up here just to make it a bit rounder, and then maybe some slightly darker ones up here where it's all very light. I think that's a pretty good shape. I'm just going to add my dark centers again. So where have we got a set? There. I'm going to redo that one where it's bled out quite far. There. If I do too many at once, sometimes I lose where the centers are, but again, it's not a perfect science. Just add that contrast in where you think you haven't got very much, and then the rest of it will bleed out. If you have a little pair like that, you can sometimes do a half center. I'm going to do a bit more in there where it's all gone a bit pale. Sometimes do a little edge like that. Okay, there we go. I think that looks really good, but I'm going to keep an eye on it as it dries to see if it needs any more contrast. While that's all settling and drying, we'll have a look at the stems and the leaves now. Because this is a very blue flower, what we're going to do is keep the greens also aligned with the blue. So mix some of the same blues into our greens to make sure that it all looks unified. So here I'm using some Sap Green, and then I'm just going to add some Prussian Blue to that to make it nice and deep, and then lots of water, because while we want the greens to complement it, we don't want them to overpower the blue of the flowers. So we're going to use quite a light mixture. And then we're going to imagine, as always with our stems, they come out of the center and then come down and curve. And hydrangea stems are pretty thick. You can also add a touch of brown into this if you like. And then we are going to look at some nice big rough jagged leaves to support this. So hydrangeas have massive flat jagged leaves. So I'm going to pull out a stem there and then get my brush loaded up with loads of water, press it down almost flat against the page, and then drag back and forwards to create that lovely rough texture. You can drop in some wet on wet there, and then try and leave some white space with your zigzag strokes to come out like that. Then we can add more wet on wet. You can go back over any bits you don't like. Maybe add a touch more blue in places as well. Just really play around with this and the rough shape of it. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side, but start at a different point from the stem. The idea is that then we don't have anything that's completely symmetrical and looks really unbalanced. And just like it's a mirror image. So we're going to do the same thing. You can use multiple strokes for this as well if it's easier. Like this, making each one separate. And then I'm going to curve this around and almost back down. You can see the size of these leaves. I think they're really fun. You can also do a kind of detail around the edge as well, just to get a bit of contrast in there. Darken the edges maybe. I'm also going to slightly darken that stem just to connect it all up to a similar tone. Okay, then if you have any bits where you think this all looks the same tone, one of my favourite techniques is to just go in with a bit of water and maybe lift some bits up to increase the contrast in there. This one has really good contrast, but this one's looking a bit flat. So we'll just go in and lift some of that, and then maybe go and just drop a bit of water in there and let it run out. Create some nice blooms and textures. I'm also going to go back over that bit because it had dried too much, and it's going to get patchy when it dries if that's dry and all the rest of the bits are very wet. Okay, I really like those leaf details. I'm just going to have another look at this and make sure there's no more. I can see that this doesn't have a whole lot of contrast in there as well. So I'm just going to add a couple of final details here. Some darkness there, a bit more in there. I think that's it. The rest of it has some really good contrast and it's got some great little blooms going on. I love these little floods where a bit of water gets from a very wet area into a dark area. I think they have a really good texture. I really like how this looks. I think we're going to leave it there. That is how I paint a hydrangea. Alright, there we have it. We're all done. And I love how it looks as it's drying up. It's a really easy loose floral technique to learn, and it's almost meditative painting those little flowers. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and let me know in the comments what flower we should do next. See you in the next one.